am a librarian at the Towson branch. Good evening and welcome to the Baltimore Dialogs on Race, Voter Rights panel discussion. This is the second program in a series of discussions around race and public policy in Baltimore County. This is made possible through a collaboration between Baltimore County Public Library, the Baltimore County Office of Equity and Diversity, the Baltimore Human Relations Commission, and WEAA 88.9 Morgan State University. In recent years, we have seen an increase in policies which disproportionately impact the ability of those in poverty, those with disabilities, students, the elderly, and minorities to activate their voices through voting. Limited number of polling places with limited accommodations, the absence of same-day registration, gerrymandering, the inability to simply transfer voter registration when you move in many states, ID restrictions on voting, and restrictions placed on individuals convicted of a felony present significant obstacles to voting. According to statistics provided by the American Civil Liberties Union, across the country, 1 in 13 Black Americans cannot vote due to disenfranchisement laws. 1/3 of voters who have a disability report difficulty voting. Only 40% of polling places fully accommodate people with disabilities. And across the country, counties with larger minority populations have fewer polling sites and poll workers per voter. What can be done about these inequities? And what role can we all play in closing voting gaps so that our democracy is more representative of everyone in coming decades? We will explore these questions and others in this panel discussion. And now, allow me to introduce our moderator for this evening, Farajii Muhammad.
Thank you.
Farajii has centered his many missions and initiatives around one central concept: redefining leadership for the next generation and especially the Black community. Farajii is a speaker, community organizer, writer, and music artist. Currently, Farajii is the host of For the Culture, the Associated Press award-winning daily news and culture show, which airs on WEAA 88.9 FM, Morgan State University. From this platform, he discusses topical issues from politics to education to health and Black arts and culture. It is my honor to welcome Farajii Muhammad. Welcome, Farajii. Farajii is going to introduce our illustrious panel.
Fantastic. Good evening, and thank you so much, Brenda. And I want to thank all of the wonderful staff of the Baltimore County Public Library, the Baltimore County Commission, all the partners. And of course, those of us here at WEAA, we want to thank the Baltimore County Public Libraries for inviting us to be a part of this discussion and to help moderate this discussion, especially at a very, very critical time. We are officially 7 days away. I don't know about my panelists because everybody got the straight face on tonight, but I feel like a child waiting for his birthday because there is a lot that we need to consider. But most importantly, there are a lot of big issues on the table, Brenda, that we need to discuss. And one of the big conversations right now at this present moment, which is why this conversation is so important, is talking about voter suppression. We are currently in a historic moment because already, folks, 64 million Americans have already casted their ballots for the next president of the United States and then going down the ballot. 64 million. These numbers are historic. These numbers blow away the numbers that we saw in 2016 at the same time. And so here in the state of Maryland, today is only day 2 of the early voting. And we heard from Ms. Nikki Charlson of the Maryland Board of Elections saying to us that there has been a record number of folks that had turned out to the polls at the beginning of early voting yesterday. Here at Morgan State University, we are one of the election centers, and there were folks lining up to the polls as early as 4 in the morning. Before the sun even rose, the lines were already there here at Morgan State University. So this is a very, very big moment, an important moment, and I'm so glad to see that so many people are getting involved and getting engaged. But at the same time, we cannot neglect the reality that there are going to be many people that are going to be turned away at the polls. Brenda, you highlighted that data about the level of suppression and disenfranchisement within the Black and Brown communities. And this is a very big problem because Black people already have I would say, a unique relationship with the political system. But to add this into the mix, it takes that relationship to the next level. And more importantly, if we're talking about making sure that our democracy truly works, every vote counts. And that should be the credo across the board, regardless of what color of your skin, who you worship, how you believe, the way you dress, sexual orientation. Every vote needs to be counted. But unfortunately, that is not the case here in America. So tonight, I am very excited to have this illustrious panel joining us to talk to us about the many different dynamics of this larger problem of voter suppression. Let me get to our wonderful panelists. First, we have Mr. Tony Fuguette, who is the president of the East Towson-based Baltimore County branch of the NAACP. He is also the director of the Central Collections Unit, Department of Budget and Management for the state of Maryland. And he also sits on the board of directors of the Reginald F. Lewis Family Foundation, which is a nonprofit organization founded by his brother in 1987, and he is active in other nonprofit and education circles, such as the advisory board of Johns Hopkins Department of Psychiatry. Mr. Fuguette, thank you so much for being a part of the conversation. Oh, we got you on mute. Got to get you off of mute. There we go.
Yep. You're still on mute.
Want to make sure his voice is heard tonight.
Okay, I'm there now.
There we go.
There you go. Okay, technology, you gotta love it. Thank you for having me. Delighted to be here, and looking forward to the conversation tonight.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you. Also, we have a policy and regulatory professional in an increasingly uncertain landscape, Ms. Natasha Murphy, who is a firm believer in enacting meaningful change via informed planning, policy, and advocacy. She's a strong advocate for civic engagement and participation and currently serves as the chief of staff for Black Girls Vote, which is a nonprofit grassroots organization focused on engaging, educating, and empowering women of color to leverage their voting power to transform the democratic process. Natasha, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Good evening. Thank you so much for having me. Definitely echo the sentiments of our earlier panelists. Super excited for tonight's conversation, and also, for the next 7 days as we approach, kind of the conclusion of election 2020.
Did you say the conclusion, Natasha? Come on, let's be real. Let's start the conversation off with facts. We will see, but we're certainly happy to have you. Thank you. Joining us also is Ms. Nora Benavidez, who is the director of U.S. Free Expression Programs at PEN America, where she guides the organization's national advocacy agenda on First Amendment and free expression issues. She is a lawyer by training, and prior to joining PEN America, she worked in the private practice as a civil and human rights litigator in Atlanta. She has represented victims of unconstitutional police practices, First Amendment infringements, discrimination in public schools, and voting rights violations. In addition to her work as a litigator, she previously worked as a staff attorney at the ACLU of Georgia, where she litigated significant constitutional issues and assisted in statewide advocacy. Nora, thank you so much for joining us in the conversation.
Great to be here. Honestly, every person on this panel is so impressive. I got to step up my game. I'm ready. I'm ready to be here. So thanks so much.
Thank you. Also joining us is Ms. Dana Vickers Shelley. Dana has been committed to achieving fairness and justice for Black and Brown children, families, and communities since distributing NAACP voter registration flyers as a teenager with her mother. She got some skin in the game. She serves as the executive director of the ACLU of Maryland since 2018, and she brings a host of political advocacy expertise and race equity values to the organization's mission of empowering Marylanders to exercise their rights so that the law values and uplifts their humanities. She has previously developed and advised on the strategic communications for the Annie E. Casey Foundation, the Southern Poverty Law Center, BET, and was on the faculty of the illustrious Morgan State University's School of Global Journalism and Communication. Dana, I think I'm familiar with that institution.
I know you are, Farajii. Thank you so much for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. Actually, Farajii, at one point, your wife was in one of my speech classes, and she is fantastic, as you well know.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, she's all right.
Well, I thought she was pretty great.
No, she is. She's fantastic. No, that's I did not know that. I definitely did not know that. So they don't call us Baltimore for anything, Dana, you know? Thank you.
Well, I'm really excited to be here tonight. As we talk about voting rights, one of the things that ACLU Maryland has been able to do over the last several months, working with the Coalition of Voting Rights Advocates, is being led by the work of Black women who are formerly incarcerated and who are leading efforts to make sure that people who are formerly incarcerated are able to reclaim their voting rights in Maryland, as well as to be able to vote inside. So we're excited to be a part of that and to support that leadership. Thank you.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to your insight on this issue tonight, Dana. Thank you again. And also we have joining us Mr. Bruce Robinson, who is the president of the Baltimore County Board of Elections, which is a bipartisan agency that oversees the oversight board appointed by the governor upon recommendations of the principal political parties. He serves as the 2020 chairman of the Baltimore County Board of Canvassers, and he began serving as a 2006 as a substitute member of the board. He is from the great city of Baltimore, has a rich history in the city, and we are so excited and happy to have him join us tonight for this very important conversation. Mr. Bruce Robinson, thank you so much, sir, for checking in and being with us.
Thank you for having me. I have a lot to learn here tonight. I can tell by the backgrounds of the other panelists and the limited exposure that I've had to them. So I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely. And certainly last but not least is Ms. Barbara Crane, who joined the board of directors of the League of Women Voters of Baltimore County in 2015 after she retired and had time to give back to her community. She has been the chair of the Voter Service Committee since 2016, and her responsibilities include preparing the voter's guide for each election, coordinating voter registration events, and assisting with polling places evaluations during the primary and general election. Ms. Crane, thank you so much. Actually, Ms. Crane, it's interesting. I helped to organize a candidates forum at Friends School earlier this year, and we used the League of Women's Voters, that guide, as the resource on how to have a voter, a candidates forum. So I appreciate the guidance from that.
Thank you very much for saying that. It's an honor to be here. It's an illustrious group, and I expect I'm going to learn a lot.
Absolutely. Thank you. Folks, again, as Brenda said in the beginning, we are going to have this conversation, but as we have this conversation, we're going to open up the conversation to you. We want you to make sure that you put your questions in the Q&A portion of this broadcast and to, put your ideas and just share your thoughts with us. And once we get to that portion of the discussion, I will do my best to try to get to as many of your questions as possible to get the answers from our esteemed panelists here tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to start the conversation because we've been talking about voter suppression, and some people would even say voter intimidation. But let's kind of define or have some clarity about what does that actually mean when we say voter suppression. Mr. Fuguette, I'm gonna start with you, sir. What does that actually mean? How should we define voter suppression?
Think of voter suppression as making it very difficult for an individual to cast a vote and to put certain restrictions and burdens on that individual before they would have an opportunity to vote. And that would be it. And then also, if you would, when you look at limiting, if you would, where you can vote, that is also a way of suppressing, if you would, the vote.
That's it. And so it's really, setting up some blockage, some issues for a person to just simply cast the ballot. Is that the case?
That's correct. I mean, it's just making it difficult for you. Like you got to bring somebody that knows you to sign for you. You have to bring a driver's license. You have to have 2 forms of identification. You have to do, so basically different states, if you would, raise different bars to, if you would, prevent people from actually coming to vote.
Ms. Crane, I want to get your thoughts. Is there anything else that we need to consider as we kind of define voter suppression?
That was a very good description and discussion. I think that what Tony emphasized is the person's response to what's happening. Because it's one thing to have laws saying that everyone can vote and everyone has an equal right to vote and is supposed to vote. And it's another thing to actually make that happen in all circumstances.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that, and Ms. Shelley, I want to go to you as we're talking about voter intimidation. Can that be put into the same context? Because I've actually seen it used interchangeably when we have this conversation about trying to stop people to get to the polls.
I think they're definitely connected. I particularly like the definition of voter suppression that Georgia leader Stacey Abrams has used, where she said that incompetence plus malfeasance equals voter suppression. So one of the challenges about voter suppression is that it doesn't have to be someone coming at it from a negative framework, like I'm going to try to stop people from voting and then put a plan in place for doing that. That's certainly the most egregious way. But if a board of elections or election judges or people running the elections or state legislators make it more difficult for folks, that would be malfeasance. Incompetence is not having the right information, not having all the ballots out at the same time, or not having all the machines out when people go to early voting centers. Again, that's incompetence. Not getting the right information out to people in time, that's incompetence. And that also stifles people from being able to exercise their voice and use their voice to vote.
Mr. Robinson, I gotta bring you into this part of the discussion because Ms. Shelley just talks about this level of incompetence. The Board of Election, whether you're talking about on the state level, local level, within the state, has been under a lot of criticism, some scrutiny, and some fire. Here in Baltimore City, I mean, the Board of Election has been almost deemed as being one of the key agents as to why there has been so much dysfunction within the voting process. To talk to us about what role the Board of Election play in this whole thing, because when people say, "Oh, my ballot, I cast my ballot, it wasn't counted, I didn't get that email," the first institution that we look at is our local Board of Elections. Talk to us a little bit about that.
That's an interesting stopping point. It starts at the top. We've had 4 elections in Baltimore City, Baltimore County, Howard County this year. We had a congressional primary for the special election for Mr. Cummings passing. And that was the only normal run election that we've had so far. The next election was the general for him and for his seat. And that was directed to be done by mailing ballots to everybody, as opposed to what would normally happen. People would request an absentee ballot and they'd get an absentee, or they would go to a polling place. But the polling place option was eliminated because of the COVID-19 outbreak, the lack of judges, the lack of people willing to go out of their homes and possibly be exposed. And I'm sure that there was a perception of suppression and of denial of vote, although everybody that was in the game on the election side was trying to make the adjustments to make it easier. State board, under an emergency order, changed statutes to make it easier for people to get to the vote, to the ballot, changed the rules for how the canvass would be conducted so that it could be done more transparently in an area where everyone could see it, but without putting people at additional risk.
Yeah.
And that was really complex. Then we got to the presidential primary, and the governor's order, as you all will recall, was send everybody in the world a ballot. Anybody that's registered to vote. Well, not everybody that's registered to vote is properly registered. I have a son who lives in North Carolina. He's been there for 10 years or more, and he received the mailings for that. And
Wow.
I'm still working to get it fixed, and so is he from his end. It just happens. People are transient voters. And if they don't tell their local board that they've moved, the local board can't find them. The things that happen in each jurisdiction, Baltimore City is unique. The pressures on the Baltimore City board politically are just extraordinary. They're virtually across the street from City Hall, and no one minds stopping in and asking Mr. Jones to do something for them, to do it in another way. And he's limited by the state board giving direction to the local board. We work under the statute, but also under their direction. And I'm with a local board. And that it just creates tension there that we try not to get to the voters. A normal election in Baltimore County that we're going through right now would have 236 precincts, 4,000 judges, election judges that were hired and trained, and they're working the polls. And what we ended up with, because of the COVID-19, because of the state board decision to go to the voting centers, which have a lot of positives about them, was that we have 11 early voting centers in Baltimore County, and on election day we'll open 30 more voting centers that are at principally high schools, which are in population centers. That's where people live, is where the kids are going to school. And that was a decision passed down to us. We had to go to all those buildings, and every one of them is handicap accessible. All of the judges have been trained and retrained. We're fortunate all of our judges working those centers are experienced judges. They weren't brand new people who raised their hand because they saw the crisis. The people that saw the crisis are being used in other capacities, not in that managing the election in the precincts. The accessibility for everyone to the vote is of a principal highest priority for us. Everyone entitled to cast a vote should have that vote counted. I did hear in the conversation about the communications when you've delivered your ballot to a ballot box and you did or did not get an email. That all depended on whether you provided an email with your application, and not everybody wants to do that. And once that happens, the next step is, was it accepted? We won't know what's accepted and not accepted until November 13th or so, because those ballots are they're in the office. The envelopes are being opened, they're being checked for signature, the ballots are being checked for tabulated with a scanner. They're being set aside and stacked, and then they're scanned daily, every day of the week. But those numbers can't.
Looks like we might be experiencing some technical difficulties with Mr. Robinson, but and hopefully we can get him back in a few moments. But I wanna take this conversation to Natasha and to Nora to get their take on this as well. And Mr. Robinson, you back?
Not yet. Yes.
Okay. All right. I wanted to let you finish your thought on that, sir.
The ballots that are being processed in Baltimore County, we're looking at more than 400,000 ballots are going to be counted over the next 2 weeks.
Wow.
They're being counted now, and those results are being sequestered. We're just holding on to them until all the polls in the state close on election night. And that's when everybody, all the local boards can release their information.
So,
But the next day, go ahead.
Mr. Rob, I want to make sure that because you're sharing some good information, so I don't want anyone to lose sight of it. But you're saying that the ballots, when they get in, person puts them into a drop box. They go to the poll. Once they get in, they're going to check for signatures. They're going to be scanned. They're going through that whole process. But we may not. The election won't be certified, quote unquote, until November 13th. Is that what you're saying?
At the earliest.
At the earliest. Okay. All right. I'm glad that you pointed that out. I want to bring Natasha and Nora into this. Natasha, when we are talking about this level of engagement, and I didn't put it on Mr. Robinson to talk about the politics of it, because even though the state, under the direction of Miss Linda Lamone, it's a very political issue. We even had the Lieutenant Governor Boyd Rutherford on my show to talk about the fact that something needs to be done, because she's been in that role for so long, and there have been so many disruptions within the election cycles that it's justified to kind of change leadership. So, but my question to you about that, Natasha, is that when we see inconsistencies, Mr. Robinson talked a little bit about that, but when we see those levels of inconsistencies, how do we keep, very essential, crucial voting blocks engaged? How do we make sure that folks aren't going to feel some level of apathy, or they don't become deterred for even casting a ballot, and especially when you're talking about a crucial voting block as Black women?
Sure, absolutely. So kind of as Mr. Robinson mentioned, this past election cycle has been unprecedented in our region in so many ways, not just due to the pandemic, but also a lot of the additional activity that did take place due to the passing of Congressman Elijah Cummings. And so I think, it does present an opportunity in which I feel like elections have been at the forefront of so many people's minds for quite some time. But Farajii, like you mentioned, there has been a lot of activity and unfortunately a lot of misinformation. The targets have kind of been changing over the past few weeks as the Board of Elections and the overall democracy community has pivoted and shifted, mainly in response to the pandemic. And so to make sure that groups are, engaged as well as educated as they go to cast their ballot, I think the onus is really on, those of us who exist, the individuals and nonprofits and, other organizations that are committed to expanding voting rights and democracy access to ensure that our targeted populations are prepared with the latest and greatest information. I know, even back in the primaries, we partnered with the Baltimore City Board of Elections just to host, kind of bi-weekly webinars to make sure that, folks were up to date with the latest and greatest version of information as it related to, their polling locations, where they could drop their ballot off if need be. Even now, kind of the nomenclature, for folks who did provide their email address, they're getting that email saying, okay, my ballot was received, but does that mean it was counted? Just kind of providing and arming folks with, a common set of definitions, as well as, key deadlines and other pertinent information, I think is really one of the most powerful tools to make sure that our electorate is informed.
Natasha, I want you to also speak about the fact that, for Black women, people have said that Black women, was able to ensure that former President Barack Obama was able to get into office. That people have said that Black women is the backbone of the Democratic Party. But there's also some different conversation that Black women are not monolithic voters. And certainly members of the Black community are not monolithic voters. And that you have a lot of Black women who are looking for, people and other avenues by which they can make sure that their voices are heard. Talk to us a little bit about, what can we expect in the change of the views that Black women have about the voting process? Are you finding that more Black women are saying, you know what, I'm going to get out to vote, or is there a greater apathy that is starting to set in?
I think we're definitely seeing, from kind of 2016 and beyond, a kind of a sustained commitment of, the Black female demographic to continue to lead in voter turnout and civic participation. But Farajii, as you mentioned, there definitely has been that shift in which, Black women are calling on candidates and elected officials to kind of earn our vote. What are the tangible policies that you are going to provide to the African-American community, as well as, that subset of being Black women, to ensure that, we have equal opportunity in a variety of areres? Yeah. So I definitely don't see any type of apathy in our population. Right. Again, just that renewed commitment to make sure that if they want the power, then we need the policy in exchange for our vote.
I want to bring Ms. Nora Benavides, who serves as the director of U.S. Free Expression Programs at Penn America, to share her thoughts about this. She's also been working in the area of civil and human rights litigation and done work on, of course, for voting rights violations. Nora, when we look at the level of disenfranchisement that is currently happening within the Black community and even in the Latino community, and I saw people, I read a piece around the impact that COVID-19 has had on the indigenous community, Latino, Black, and the Asian American community, the backlash of COVID-19. I'm wondering, because of this pandemic and because of this disenfranchisement, what kind of turnout should we expect, or do you think that we should expect from both the Black and the Latino community, considering you got all these other challenges on the table?
Well, I think that's a great question. On the one hand, I think we need to expect the unexpected. And my number one recommendation this election season is we are not dealing with 2000. We are dealing with such a different landscape. People compare what we are dealing with and can anticipate to the Gore and Trump and Bush issues of 2000. I just don't think that's where we are. I think that the pandemic and what we have then seen around misleading narratives, the civil unrest and the shooting and killing of George Floyd and other Black men. Philadelphia just yesterday, another Black man was shot and killed by police. That is a battleground state. I think that these are flashpoints in which we see people wanting to use their voice, and that we see then in response to that efforts to clamp down on. And so when you ask, what should we anticipate? I think it's going to really depend. It's going to depend on where we are. It's going to depend on rides to the polls. It's going to depend on the single poll worker that knows the law, that you can have a translator in the ballot box if you are Spanish speaking and Latino, perhaps. It will depend on one single election official, Bruce, I'm looking at you, printing enough provisional ballots. It's going to depend on someone like me not posting the video that says a line is long and which can lead to voter depression, because maybe we're socially distancing. Maybe we are not actually waiting that long. It just looks long. I think that honestly, it's going to look different everywhere. And we have to be really careful, all of us, in how we are talking about this election season, and then how we talk about that period in the days and weeks that follow. And most of my work now is centered actually on what does disinformation do to civic engagement, and how is that a form of voter suppression? So I would, I listened so carefully to everyone, and Tony, the only thing I would add to your definition of voter suppression is that disinformation is absolutely one of the tactics to disincentivize us, mostly Black, Latino, other more marginalized groups to feel like institutions that have long overlooked us are not going to serve us this election season. And so, there are a lot of ways that we can come back at that question, but that's really my baseline, Farajii.
Nora, I want to ask this follow-up question, then we want to bring Ms. Crane and Ms. Shelley and Mr. Fugett into this conversation, which is, how much should the federal government step in to protect this right to vote? The reason I'm asking is because Kristen Clark, who serves as the executive director for the National Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, she wrote an op-ed for the USA Today that came out today, and she talked about the president's recruiting for his army for Trump. She said that the army of unsanctioned, untrained poll watchers is a part of a disturbing torrent of voter suppression and intimidation activities we have seen this election season. She said, already this year, my organization, Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, has filed litigation and undertaken advocacy to stop coordinated efforts to intimidate voters, especially Black voters and other voters of color. And then she quoted Frederick Douglass. She said, Frederick Douglass put the point plainly, asking, quote, the United States government made the Negro a citizen. Will it protect him as a citizen? So how much should the federal government step in to protect this right to vote, Nora, considering you even got the president of the United States that are recruiting, not from the Board of Elections, not from Black Girls Vote and from other organizations that have relationships on how to handle the community, just anybody.
Well, I think the federal government, as all local, state, and federal government agents should be doing, is the most for the most. Unfortunately, that's not what we see. I think about having lived and worked as a civil rights attorney for years in Georgia, and the wonderful and great and late John Lewis always said, we fought so hard for this right, use it. The government does not currently treat the right to vote as a right. Certainly not a right for all.
Is that based upon, is it because of laws, or is that just based upon who's sitting in the Oval Office?
I candidly will say I think it's because of who is in the Oval Office. And I would say that Kristen is wonderful. I think she is fantastic in every way. I don't know if you know, I used to work with election protection and with the Lawyers Committee. So I will just over and over, they don't pay me to say it anymore, but they're amazing. And the work they do in defending voting rights on election day in the months before and after is fantastic. But we have a president who unilaterally will try to exact reprisals and to censor voices when he doesn't like them. And that trickles all the way down to our voting rights, because our vote is our voice. And so we have to find ways like what Natasha is doing, what frankly Barbara is doing, all of the ways that we can push back against that narrative to feel empowered, like our voice will count, that it will matter. That is what we all have to be doing this election season.
Ms. Shelley, how is that possible? You've been overseeing the work of the ACLU of Maryland, but how is it that possible that we are essentially fighting for the integrity of our ability to participate in a system of democracy that is supposed to be protected, ensured to every citizen? We are fighting from it, and that fight is with our own government. So that leaves us as the constituents in a very, very unique conundrum, especially if you're talking about, hey, vote for a government that could essentially be against your own interests.
Well, first, Farajii, I think it's important for people to remember, even when we talk about the founding documents of the United States of America, were written and didn't include most of the people on this panel. So in Maryland as well, one of the things that we're trying to do at the ACLU through our voting rights work and through being people-centered and community-centered in terms of how we're doing voting rights advocacy is bringing in and making sure the voices of the folks directly impacted by the issues that we're paying attention to reimagine policing, to make sure that families remain together, to make sure that people understand Black Lives Matter, to make sure that those values, people understand them and that they're voting and supporting them. And to know that the only way to be involved, I mean, the phrase, the price of democracy, we have to remain vigilant. It's not something where it's written and we can go to the National Archives and visit it and go, isn't that great? We are working on this every single day. Voting rights is a moment in time in an election year, midterms, et cetera, where people are paying attention to this, but the quest and the battle to preserve democracy and expand it so that everyone can access the promise of the Constitution, particularly those who were not included at our founding.
It makes me think of Ms. Shelley, former Vice President Biden, talking about this system as the American experiment. I keep hearing this terminology used, the American experiment. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, we're still experimenting. we haven't even proven that this worked fully yet. I'm not I study politics, but at the end of the day, certainly I'm not a political figure. But for some people, this system of things, some people feel like it's a total violation of human rights and human dignity and the human voice, whereas some other people look at the American experiment of democracy as being the end-all be-all. What's the proper view that we should have of this process and of this political system that we are part of?
Well, I think an individual's perspective on everything is great or everything is terrible, again, those are extremes, depends on who they are, right? Depends on their experience, depends on the access to those rights that folks may have or have not had, and how long have they had those rights. I think that what's most important, and one of the things that we continue to advocate is that, particularly now as we're in this election time, is to make sure that people understand their voice. I think Nora said this, your voice and your vote, those are the same things. Let no one deny that to you. We can talk about history. We can talk about 1965. We can talk about 2015 in terms of the Baltimore uprising. We can talk about 48 hours ago in Philadelphia. The fight for our lives, the fight for our livelihoods, all depend on voting. And again, all the way down the ticket, right? From dog catcher on up to president, or president on up to dog catcher, whatever it might be. All of those positions have an impact and influence on your life. And
Absolutely.
So access to the ballot has to be available to everyone.
Absolutely. Folks, again, we have been having a conversation about voter suppression. If you have some ideas, if you want to share your thoughts or you have some questions, we're going to be opening up the question and answer portion in just a few moments, but you can put your questions right in our Q&A section right there at the bottom of your screen, and we will get to as many of your questions as possible. Ms. Crane, I want to bring you back into this because the other part about this, something that now, you can correct me if I'm wrong about this, Ms. Crane, but now there's a much bigger conversation about voter fraud and foreign interference. Let's talk about that a little bit, because that also has added to some level of disenfranchisement and has deterred people from getting a part of this. It was reported earlier this week, last week actually, that Iran and Russia have been interfering in our election. And I'm thinking to myself, did this happen when President Obama was in office? Did this happen? I mean, I'm just really asking this question because I'm like, okay, since President Trump has been in office, it seems like it's a free for all from all countries. Everybody's got something to say about the national election here in America. But is this real? I mean, how much of a concern should we as the voters be about this level of interference?
I think it's a big concern. I think that the problem of disinformation is a much bigger problem than voter fraud. There's really very little documented voter fraud. If you look at the Heritage Foundation's database, which is the most complete one that I've seen, it goes back to 1979. They're still working on it. They still take cases. It's 2020. It's the incidents in there are all reflect either a conviction for fraud or an election that had to be redone because of fraud. And there are about 1,300 examples, which sounds horrible at first, but when you say that's over 42 years in 50 states, all those elections, hundreds of millions, billions of votes cast at that point, that to have that few truly documented instances is I think, remarkable. And yet there's this backlash against voter fraud that has to be stopped. And we have to be so careful about it. We have to be so careful about especially mail-in ballots, but all kinds of ballots, voter IDs. Those are just really statistically not almost non-problems. They're not zero.
Wait a minute. So wait a minute. Hold on, Ms. Crane, because you're about to get you're going against a whole propaganda machine right now. So you're saying that statistically speaking, that is such a small issue compared to the larger issue of disinformation.
Well, yes, I think that's true.
Wow.
And the thing is, if you want to affect the outcome of an election, it's not very efficient to go looking for somebody's mail-in ballot and hoping that you will know their date of birth and you'll be able, to deal with it. That's not an efficient way to do it. Mm-hmm. Voting twice, reprehensible as it might be, is not a very efficient way of changing the outcome of an election. But if you can sow discord and make people be afraid that if they do a mail-in ballot, that people are going to get their information and haul them off to jail or, do some other horrible thing, that's going to have a much bigger effect on the ultimate outcome than anything, you can do with an individual vote.
So what do you recommend that folks do, that constituents do, to be able to differentiate between valid, correct information and wrong information?
I'm sorry, could you rephrase that? Because disinformation and misinformation?
Yeah, because somebody, if they're seeing this information, whether they're seeing what's coming across their social media timeline or what they might see on a website, they're, and I'm not saying this to be facetious or even to be mean-spirited, but I think a lot of people don't really understand the process in terms of the government process. And, we used to have that schoolhouse rock situation when we were back in school years ago, but just the simple things of how government works, it still seems very foreign to a lot of people, especially in this day and age, even though we got technology and more opportunities to learn. So how do we differentiate the information that, okay, this is good information versus, this is kind of sketchy?
Well, I think one of the important things is to consider what you're hearing. Are you hearing it from more than one source?
Okay.
Is it just one source? And quite honestly, particularly in today's climate, the more outrageous and the more scandalous it sounds, the more I would want to try to verify it before I did much more. I can't help my blood pressure will go up a little bit, but to try to, just back off a minute and see what happens.
Yeah.
Instead of immediately sending it to all my friends, just take a deep breath and just see what you read or what you hear in 6 hours or the next day.
That's a good point.
You can also, if they're very specific things, you can certainly call the Board of Elections. You could call the League of Women Voters. We don't have everything on every possible rumor that's going around.
Right.
We can certainly help begin to, try to sort it out, or at least give perspective or try to find someone who knows more about it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Mr. Fuguette, Ms. Crane talked about, trying to just break up this, being able to kind of be sharper on the information, because technology has played a huge part of this whole process, right? And so it was announced that Facebook, they have on their campaign, and I don't know if anybody else saw this, but every time you post something on Facebook or Instagram that has the word vote or elections or something in there, it automatically creates like this automatic link that you can get more resources and information based upon where you are about the process. But it was announced that Facebook had actually registered 4.4 million new voters this election cycle, which is interesting because they were also the target of a lot of scrutiny because of the disinformation and the misinformation that was placed on their platform from 2016. So I wanted to get your take on this, Mr. Fuguette, in terms of how can we integrate technology to make it easier for people to vote, and why hasn't our 21st century technology caught up to improving the electoral process?
Well, when you have the free, if you would, use of information in terms of technology, it makes it very, very difficult. And usually what you can do, and as was said earlier, is that you can look at the source. But when potentially the source is the president of the United States, and they're sending out tweeters that may be disinformation, it's very difficult for people to make a determination on what's real and what's not real. And as was said earlier, I think it's very good that you look at multiple sources. You can't get your information from one source. And one of the other things you were talking about earlier was at the federal level. But keep in mind that the challenge really is at the state level, and that once states were free to run their own elections and how they wanted to run them, I mean, they basically could do anything they wanted to do. And what you're seeing is happening now in the Supreme Court is that basically they're challenging what states are attempting to do, good and bad, if you would, as it relates to elections.
Let me ask you though. Let me ask you on that point though. Do you think that the framers got it right to keep it at the state level, or there should be some new conversation about a central policy?
Well, I think there was a central policy where states were basically breaking the law and doing things. And then the Supreme Court let the states go back to do their thing. And then just recently I read where a Supreme Justice said, hey, maybe they aren't going to do the right thing if we give them, and maybe we ought to put them on lockdown again. Okay. So it's a state to state kind of a battle, and it has to do that. So with technology and the disinformation that's out here, and the people who are putting it out there. I mean, it's like, the president is selling that to you, disinformation, and that's just not a good thing. And it is more and more difficult for people to determine what's real and what's not, so to speak.
Natasha, information in the community, whether you're talking about quote unquote marginalized communities, can go really fast. I read a piece where they said that, for example, 50% of young people get their news from Facebook. I'm like, oh Lord. Oh boy. That's and so if you, and I see this time and time again on my timeline, where people will share old information and presented that, oh, look what President Obama, he said that in 2016. He said that in 2017. Or look what this, and they share that information over and over again. So when you have this information, especially in communities that are already marginalized, communities that are not getting the full access, you don't have, state, the elections board, volunteers coming through those neighborhoods and say, hey guys, I see census people doing it, right? We got census workers making move, but when it comes to the election, that level of engagement and outreach is not there. How do we make sure that those quote unquote marginalized communities, Black, Brown, the Asian Americans, not Indigenous people, how do we make sure that they aren't out of the loop of making sure of getting the correct and right information?
Yes, Farajii. I've also seen firsthand just how quickly, just straight falsehoods or outdated information, and as well as disinformation, can travel at the speed of sound, is what it feels like. We have
Right.
collegiate chapters across the region, and oftentimes they'll drop in our group chat, like, oh, I just saw this. And we have to remind them, like, ladies, take a look at the date, or, make sure you're paying attention, as Barbara mentioned, to the source of this information. But as it pertains to, quote unquote, marginalized or hard to reach communities, I think it is incredibly critical that trusted resources like community organizations, the church, other civic entities are armed with the correct information, as they tend to be the most critical as well as effective messengers to combat a lot of the mistruths that may be floating around the various media platforms. And so ensuring that these entities are up to date and fully informed to combat this information, I think is incredibly important in ensuring our communities are able to cast their ballot in an educated and informed manner.
Nora, I would love to get your take on the same question. How do we make sure that those communities aren't out of the information loop?
Well, I don't think any community is out of an information loop. They're just in their own information loop, and we have to meet voters where they are. For example, Spanish-speaking voters use WhatsApp so much more than other voting blocks. And there are some really interesting and innovative programs to help Spanish language voters identify misinformation in group chats. I think that faith leaders are a really great vector for credible information for Black voters and for other voters. There are really interesting ways that we can think about how solutions and how changing our digital practices can actually make a measurable difference in minimizing the spread of disinformation.
Yeah.
But we also have to acknowledge, I think, the equity components here. In 2016, the Trump campaign labeled Black voters with a label called deterrence to basically target them with narratives that were misleading, to sow discord and distrust in the institutions and lead to voter depression. Latino voters are being targeted with disinformation tactics this election cycle, similar to the way Black voters were targeted in 2016. I think that either way, we need to talk about those issues. We need to have women of color. We need to have Black researchers in tech looking at these issues. And they're not separate from civil rights. They're part of the same conversation, and we need to bring them home. So we need, like Natasha, you were saying, and I was just sort of nodding furiously. I was like, yes, we need these different sectors. I just released a toolkit for community organizers who maybe want to talk about disinformation in their work, but they don't know how. They kind of can feel around to it, but we need to give them tools. We need to give tools in Spanish. We need to give tools for first-time voters, for older adults. There are a lot of misleading narratives out there. And frankly, all of my work 24/7 is dealing with mapping and finding solutions to disinformation right now. So I am like furiously nodding to all of your comments. It is so heartening to see that these other experts are already on board. But I think that there's going to be a period that even after the election, Farajii, we have to anticipate misinformation isn't going away. It's going to continue. And it isn't the hard stop fake news that only sways and manipulates public opinion. It's the things that our friends share because they don't realize they're sharing false information. It's the miscaptioned videos, like you said, from years ago or from a different country. We've seen it around COVID. We've seen it around protests. We're seeing it around all of these now coming together. So I think what we need to do is actually learn how to pause. And usually that's my number one recommendation. We have very little time, generally, and in the 7 days before November 3rd. And I just say, if something gets your heart racing, please pause and breathe. And there are so many other deeper tips, but that's the number one.
No, that's a good point. I want to make the point that the Maryland U.S. Attorney's Office and the FBI are also warning voters about election misinformation. They have launched a national voter disinformation initiative to identify potential voter suppression schemes especially on social media. U.S. Attorney Robert Hur here in Baltimore said, quote, "The right to vote is one of the most important rights exercised by Americans. Plan now to determine when, where, and how you will vote. Don't let misinformation keep you from exercising your right to vote." And they have a host of tips. And you can go to the FBI. I know most people like FBI and voting. Yes, FBI and voting. FBI.gov/tips.
Feel the same way. I'm like,
FBI.
okay.
But I'm just saying they did put out. They are aware. Mr. Robinson, very quickly, I want to get your take on this because listening to what Natasha said, is it time for us to have some conversation? And I know that the Board of Election, bipartisan agency, and is, just deal with the election, but should we have a discussion around getting volunteers, some level of outreach from the Board of Election, you think, to help to connect the dots for voters and for people to engage the community a little bit better? I mean, like I said, we see it in the census side. Do we need to start looking or at least having a conversation about that work being done from the Board of Elections?
I'm pausing. At the Baltimore County Board of Elections, we didn't have enough scanners during the 2018 or 2016 elections. Everybody who voted knew that. We begged for those scanners and were told, nope, not enough money to buy scanners. Our budget for advertising, marketing, and reaching out to voters is zero. Nothing is provided.
Wow.
The only agency in the state, in the election community, that gets marketing money is the state board. And that's they have to go back for special allocations of money. So, it's just, there's a great deal of difference between the marketing skills and the recruiting skills to activate people than there are for learning the skills of operating the computer software that ensures that your information is correct and that the documents that you're in need of, if they get to you, that the mail-in ballot is received properly, that it's yours, and that if there's two of them, that it can get resolved, because it happens. People get two of them. Don't know how. Nobody's figured out how, but it has happened. So it's kind of it would be a great thing if there was that kind of marketing level. The census had it because they got buku bucks to run the census. And in Baltimore, the county executive was the point man for the census, and his administrative officer was directing the staff, and department heads were putting people into it. They gave us pens. They had money for what they needed to do, which was go and get those voters who had not responded to the mailing or not responded to the email. It's an expensive proposition, and government has always shown a reluctance, well, not always, in my lifetime, has shown a reluctance to spend money on elections unless something went wrong.
Wow.
And then they'll talk about it, and they'll decide to change the machines, and 10 years later, that machine that they decided to go to will be purchased. 10 years of technology out the window. And so it's a constant in elections because, like I said, Baltimore County, we're a big county. We have 34 staff. We recruit 9,000 judges for general elections. 9,000 people that we can convince they should come in and they should do the job. League of Women Voters does the inspections of the polling centers for us. Except this year, I'm doing inspections of polling centers because we can't get, they have other obligations and other responsibilities. So it falls to somebody who has supposedly a 1 day a month, relatively part-time oversight position
Mhm.
to work for, we've been working, the board has been working since May, full time, almost every day. The staff started prepping an election in October 2019. And they're working 7 days a week. They work 12-hour days minimally. You can view them online and you watch them, look in on Sunday night. You'll still see people in there opening ballots and scanning ballots because of the volume of work that's involved there. So it's a great idea, except there's not a resource.
No,
And we all need resources.
right.
With regard to I want to comment only briefly on the disinformation and those campaigns. All of the 2016 disinformation from foreign countries was happening 2015 and 2016, and it was disinforming us about that election. So it's been going on. It doesn't matter who the president is, doesn't matter who's in the Justice Department. Our enemies are constantly attempting to disrupt what we have. And what we have, pretty good ain't perfect, but if you can change the mind of people into believing that their votes aren't going to get counted, if they don't go to the poll, it won't get counted until after the election, everything gets counted.
Yeah.
And really the staff, I say it's bipartisan. We have to remember who's who, because you can't handle a ballot by yourself. If you're from one party, you can't call stuff around. You have to have two different parties present. That's the only time partisanship comes in. We just have to know who to call to walk, who has to walk with me, which one of the 10 people in the room.
Right.
But it's really the disinformation is at all levels. It's in every campaign. It's in every commercial. I've spent a couple of the last Novembers in Pennsylvania. Please, if you value your sanity, don't go to Pennsylvania and turn on a television during November. It's unbelievable. And I've been looking at elections really since way before 2000 as a particular study interest. It's just, there's a ton of it there. And we have to keep doing the pause. And as Barbara said, and I'm pointing to your pictures, I'm sorry, to look for more than one source. I have some law enforcement background as well as law, and you've got to have more than one source. You can't trust that thing that you heard, that you saw, even if you like it. Even if you say, yeah, that's how I think it should be. And that's what voters need to know. That's what women need to know. It's what men need to know. It's everybody needs to take that breath and listen carefully and evaluate the information kind of without thinking about whether it affects you, but what's the information and how credible can it be?
Mr. Robinson, very quickly, I want to ask this question from one of our watchers, and folks, you can certainly post your comments or your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen as we talk to our esteemed panelists about the issue of voter suppression. Sharisa checked in and said, hello, I keep reading about drastic changes to voting locations without the publicity to inform voters. That's another way of suppressing the vote. Is that happening in Maryland? If a location has been used for voting for 10 to 20 years and now there are changes, we need signage, radio ads, etc. Mr. Robinson, can you speak to that, sir?
Yes, it's not what's been going on in Maryland.
Okay.
You've been, if you have a television, you've been seeing multiple ads every day from the State Board of Elections telling you about the changes that have been made, telling you where to get that information. Every voter who requested an absentee ballot, and if any of you did, you know this, you received it, and it had a list of a page in it that said, these are the voting centers that you can go to when they'll be open. For everyone getting the standard ballot, who just waited or picked it up, those have the same list of voting locations. It's on the internet. It's at the State Board of Elections, at the Baltimore County Board of Elections, at the 23 other jurisdictions. They all have been putting that information out. Mailings, probably the mailings are multiple. The application talked about it, the ballots talk about it. We're talking about, we also talked about lack of ballots. I believe Shelley had mentioned that. Baltimore County has little over 400,000 voters eligible to vote in this election. We have 1.2 million ballots to ensure that we have enough of the right ballot for every person where they show up. In addition, we have ballot marking devices that take a blank piece of paper, you tell it which precinct, which you're looking for, which ballot you need, and it prints a ballot, even if there wasn't one. There are far fewer than the 236 precincts we normally have. I've spent the last week calling places that were precincts and providing them with signs to put outside their facility. Schools were calling me and saying, how come we're here to vote? People are knocking on our door. It wasn't time to vote. So that's being done. Baltimore County is going to all of those precincts I was calling and delivering signs beyond the paper signs that I was able to provide. So it's an attempt to communicate. There is so much to be communicated, and there's so little attention until, 8 days to voting.
Yeah.
Early voting starts tomorrow.
Yeah.
There's a deadline to apply for a ballot, and
Yeah.
that's when interest starts. And as I said, we are knee deep into it and putting every resource that we have into it. The election director in Baltimore County, Katie Brown, has been doing it for 30 years, and there's nothing she doesn't know. She knew that I would be the better person to send here so she can accomplish something related to the election. And the whole state runs that way. There are very, very few incompetent people, but actions will happen. Just today, a handicapped voter went up to an early voting center and said, I can't stand in this line. And the judge who greeted them at the door said, it was a long line. You can't stand in the long line. You know, if you come back at this time of day, the line won't be so long, it won't be so hard. What should they have done? They should have recognized there's a place to have these voters who are handicapped sit down inside the poll, and we put a place marker, a placeholder in the line for them. They don't vote earlier.
Yeah. Mr.
We
Robertson.
do provide and facilitate them. I'll give it back to you.
I appreciate that, Mr. Robinson. And I thank you so much for answering that question. I want to go bring Ms. Shelley. I want to get your thoughts on this, because as we are coming to the end of our conversation, and I'm just, again, we thank each and every one of you. But Ms. Shelley, let's talk about this vote plan. I'm hearing about a vote plan. Why it's important to have a vote plan. I did not know that I needed to plan something else in my life at this point. Now we need to have a vote plan. What does that mean, especially as we are 7 days away from the actual election?
So by having a vote plan, and of course wearing a mask and being physically distanced when you get to the polling place, we want to make sure, again, that people are prepared. One of the things that I would love for maybe Naomi and the team with the Baltimore County Library system to do is the spring before the next election, let's convene this panel again. Those of us who are talking with you tonight, we're thinking about voting rights and voting and access to the polls all year long, every year, even when there's not an election. We know that voting rights is the key to the door of democracy. If we don't have voting rights, if people aren't engaged, nothing can happen. Nothing good can happen without that. And so we need to make sure that people are informed, that people have the knowledge, because even some of the questions that our election protection hotline are getting are from people asking about, well, no one told me, and yet we're thinking this has been all over the media. Well, most people aren't thinking about going to vote until you're getting your coat, your keys, your money for the bus, your, whatever it might be. This year, because of COVID, because things are changing in terms of venues and locations and things, and because many of us are stressed or tired, it's been a tough year. We're saying have a plan so that if you get there and there is a long line, you're able to, you have a chair that you can sit in if you need to. Do you have a banana? I think of a banana because that's what John Lewis packed with him the day he went to, this is a story he shared with the group of us. He had a banana in his backpack when he was crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge the first time, because he said, this might be a long day. Little did he realize what history would be made there, but to have some sort of nourishment, a little bottle of water. You're going to be standing outside. It's the fall. Have a jacket, have an umbrella, simply so that as things change, if you have a plan, you're prepared.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. And Mr. Fugett, can you talk to us a little bit about some voter assistant resources that may be available, and especially for seniors, like ride sharing, Ride for Seniors, or any other support events that might be available on site for voters?
Right. In days gone by, we did offer that service, but given COVID, we are no longer able to offer that. And I'm currently not aware of any ride services that would be available for voters. Maybe one of your other panelists might have some insight on that.
All right. All right, Miss Crane, what type of ways should people kind of prepare? I mean, we're 7 days away. Some people are probably thinking, all right, here in Maryland, we just kind of started our early voting process, but how should they start to prepare, look for the rest of the week? Is it just, should we try to figure out, oh, what's the best day and time to jump in it and do it? Or should just say, you know what? I'm gonna just go ahead and go for it. I'm gonna go on Tuesday and come back home on Wednesday.
Well, this goes back, that goes back exactly to have a plan.
Yeah.
I think that it's important, since the number of voting sites is more limited than it's been in the past, although they are vote centers, which helps, not to rely on waiting till the last minute. To go sooner rather than later. Make a plan and make voting early your part of your plan, if at all possible. As to times, traditionally, early in the morning, it was always a bad time because people were trying to get in there before they went to work. With so many people at home, I'm not sure how that sorts out now. Later in the afternoon and the evening is typically busier, but sort of midday tends to historically be not quite as busy. And per the Board of Elections, Saturday and Sunday in early voting are not as busy as the weekdays.
I was about to say though, Ms. Crane, you kind of covered all times of day.
Well,
I'm waiting for the gap.
Midday is better. Midday is better.
Might be between.
I also go back to what someone else commented about looking at the lines, because I think when you look at the lines,
yeah,
you do need to take into account that people are spaced farther. And so that line is by its nature going to be longer. It's not to say they're not lines and that you may not have to wait a while, but it's probably not quite as bad as it looks.
No, I definitely agree. I definitely agree. We're going to be kind of wrapping up here, but I think that, and anyone can answer this question. I mean, one is the question about, there's been such a major focus on the presidential election, but there are also some state and local ballot initiatives that will be on the ballot. I know that on my show tomorrow, I'm going to be having a conversation with a representative from Represent Maryland to talk to us about, there are 11 citywide ballot issues in Baltimore, 2 state issues. So there are 13 ballot questions on the ballot. And we want to break it down to let people know what do each question mean. Can anyone give us a resource on how people can figure out what those ballot questions look like, what they mean, and possibly the impact that they will make. Because I know that when we get to that part of the ballot, people just like, oh, okay, I'm gonna just kind of use okay, I'm gonna just say yes, 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 yes. Or yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. What's the best way to address that?
Sure. So I would definitely recommend Baltimore Votes is a fantastic organization that exists in the democracy space. And over the past 2 weeks, they have hosted online webinars and Zoom sessions, taking the time to explain those ballot questions, which are certainly confusing and often, confound even those of us who are, all elections and all civics 24/7. So again, definitely encourage folks to visit the Baltimore Votes website or even their social media channels to check out the recordings of those webinars.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. I want to ask a question from our Q&A before we wrap up. And at the end of the wrap, I'm just going to extend a minute or so to each one of you to give some final thoughts on this. But here's a question from one of our watchers. Are you or your organization preparing for there to not be a smooth transition of power of the seat, with prayers, hopes of a Biden-Harris win, and or Trump saying any ballots after midnight are void? Then let me just throw this out there because I see the looks on your faces right now, folks. The president tweeted today, strongly trending, he put Google, since immediately after the second debate is, quote, can I change my vote, ? This refers changing it to me. The answer is, in most states, is yes. Go do it. Most important election of your life. Now, it's been reported that the phrase, can I change my vote, is the #1 phrase. And in Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan, Pennsylvania, New York, Connecticut, and Mississippi, do allow voters to change their vote. I mean, just throwing it out there, we got a president that is kind of saying, I'm going to do this, do that, do this. Like, what should we take from all this? As the yes, ma'am, Ms. Shelley, talk to me.
What we should take from this, we need to focus. Don't be distracted. At this point, get the information you need to vote, figure out candidates' issues that align with your values, take that information and complete your ballot. Turn the dial down on the radio, calm down the tweet noise, the Facebook noise, whatever it might be. Focus. We're voting as if our lives depend on this, and we need to pay attention. The catchphrase, this is the most important election of your life. Well, they said that in 16 and 12, and et cetera.
Right.
But 2020 is different than any other time. I can say that the ACLU National, we're an organization of 54 affiliates across the country, and our national operation, working with other civil rights organizations and civil liberties organizations, are looking at a range of scenarios that might happen in the days between November 3rd and January 20th, to make sure, again, in any large event, large activity, you look at what are the different possibilities of what might happen, where litigation might be needed, where advocacy might be needed. So we are planning for multiple scenarios that could happen during that important time while we're waiting to know the results of the election.
I'm glad that you brought that up, Ms. Shelley. And I guess that leads to our final question before then I'm gonna let each one of you give your final thoughts. Should we expect to know the outcome of the presidential election on November 3rd?
No.
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 No. I thought somebody was going to make me feel excited, but apparently.
If I could add just a little there, I
Sure.
mentioned Maryland won't be shut down until, they won't be close until November 13th.
Yeah.
And Baltimore County, I'm promising you, we'll be done that day. Fingers crossed, toes crossed. But all across the country, nobody is going to be able to count the millions of ballots that quickly. they all have to be, all of the mail-in ballots have to be touched at least 3 times in order to count them. The people who vote at early voting centers where they pass their ballot into a scanner, or at election day voting centers and scan their ballot, those will be counted because they're counted in that scanning machine. And the memory sticks are pulled out of them, and they're all collated and put together, tabulated that night. So you'll know that many, but you can't know the 500,000 or 250,000 ballots in Baltimore County that haven't been counted yet. And the whole country has that problem. I mean, it's just a lot of stuff. It's more stuff than anybody could plan for.
And then very quickly, really quickly, Nora, I want to get your take on this. Should we expect this to go into the courts?
Ooh, well, I was going to piggyback on Bruce, but then you gave me this curveball. I thought maybe because I was nodding furiously, you were going to say, just echo whatever Bruce said.
Thank you.
I'm sitting here, you know, with all my fun talking points. There is going to be a lot of litigation. You know, I don't live in Baltimore, though now I feel part of the party. I hope you invite me back, you guys. There's going to be a lot of litigation in a lot of states, and we could have an entirely separate panel about those cases. We're also going to see coverage about those lawsuits. Some of them are going to be really wonderful lawsuits that keep polling locations open a little longer, you know, on election day. But then there will be other more sophisticated lawsuits. And either way, in the days and the weeks that follow, my line is that patience is patriotic, because people who are waiting for delays should know that election officials are doing their job this time. It is going to look so different. And I just honestly, like Farajii, I'm going to go back to the soundbite I was practicing in my mind while Bruce was talking, because I'm listening to Bruce and I'm like, yes, there's just more. You know, people are mailing in their ballots. We don't have enough election officials to count those in advance. State laws also require some states to not even begin counting until after election polling locations close. So they can't even start their jobs on the mail-in ballots, millions potentially of mail-in ballots, until at least the evening of the 3rd. So let's just honestly like hold on to our seats while we wait. And frankly, it doesn't mean something's rigged. I think that's our natural go-to. You know, we feel like we're used to you saying, well, you know, percentage of precincts are X, Y, and Z, and it's going to look and sound different this year.
I'm so happy that you brought that up, Nora, because it made me think of, you know, we're going to be huddled around the television on election night, watching, you know, our favorite news network, hoping that they will call the election. And I just got the voice of Wolf Blitzer in my head.
Exactly. You know, yes.
So, Vermont is going for Mr. Biden.
Exactly.
You know, it's like,
I don't know what he's going to say this year.
Now, and I'm glad that you brought that up, because I think it's important for us to, and Mr. Fuguette talked about this earlier, putting things into its proper context. So that way our expectations meet reality, and we are not in a space, like you said, where we're like, oh my gosh, it's November 3rd at 11:03 and we don't know who the president of the United States is. So I think that's an excellent point. I'm going to give each one of you a 1 minute to close out on this discussion, share your thoughts, resources, and recommendations for our watching audience. Let me start with you, Mr. Robinson. Thank you again for being a part of the conversation.
There's so much. Yes, and thank you for inviting me. I've enjoyed listening and learning from all of the panelists and different perspectives on the whole issue of voter suppression and getting to vote. My close would be, make that plan, do it early in the day, add that to your plan, whatever day you're going to do it early, and relax after it's over. We can't change a thing. Once we cast our vote, our job is done. Listen to things. It's going to take a couple of weeks. Enjoy your Thanksgiving with your family, I hope, or with your friends, however you do that. And I'll remind you all, you reminded me of the 2020 or the 2000 election and the 7:30 call for Florida. Don't wait for that early call. Wait for the call from the reporters and the news stations that's much later. The same thing happened several times in several elections. So take your time, because the new president, whoever that is, doesn't raise his hand until January 20th.
Absolutely.
And my friends in Homeland Security say, pray for a 3-day blizzard on the 18th
Wow.
of January.
Wow.
Because then what happens, we can all just appreciate.
Mr. Robinson, thank you so much as you serve in the great work of the Baltimore County Board of Elections. Ms. Crane, Ms. Barbara Crane, your final minute, ma'am. What would you like for us people to walk away with?
Really echoing Bruce and other people, have a voting plan. Execute your plan. Take a deep breath, and patience is patriotic.
Thank you, Ms. Crane.
There you go.
It is. Nora doesn't know, but I'm about to tweet that. Thank you.
Yes. I only speak in tweets.
Right. Mr. Fuguette, thank you, sir, for joining us, sir. What would you like to share in your final minute?
Thank you also for having me. First of all, that the NAACP is a nonpartisan organization. I have to put that disclaimer out there. But that the message here is that elections have consequences. And if we didn't learn that in 2016, then we never will. And then the other thing is that the Black Lives Matter movement was significant in waking up and motivating young folks. Okay, and I'm hoping the marching will continue and will continue to the polls, and that they will vote. So their vote is powerful. So if we can keep the young folks. You hit the space bar, and I guess I hit it by accident. But I think that keeping the young folks involved is going to be very, very significant in the outcome of this election. So every vote counts. Don't waste your vote like the governor did. Get out and vote.
Thank you so much, sir, Mr. Fugett. Natasha Murphy of Black Girls Vote, doing the powerful work there of getting women out to the polls. What's your final thought for tonight?
Yes, in these next 7 days, I absolutely encourage everyone to participate in our democracy and ensure that their voice is heard via their vote. Thank you again so much for having me. It was such a fantastic opportunity to participate in this discussion with my partners in democracy, and wish everyone a happy election 2020.
And you guys actually have y'all have a party at the box.
Oh, yes. Thank you for the reminder. Definitely for all of your listeners here in Baltimore, as well as anyone who might be tuning in from Philadelphia or Detroit, we are offering a free voter information box. Folks can learn more about it by visiting partyatthemailbox.com. Voting is not a chore, it is a celebration. So definitely encourage folks to register for that free box.
Thank you so much, Natasha. Nora, yes, ma'am. As you have been doing the great work of being a litigator and continue to use the pen as a medium and tool for change, what would you like to share?
I think it's hard to feel like if institutions have failed us in certain communities, why get out and vote? It can feel really hard to imagine that your voice matters. And if we're helping in this conversation to expose vulnerabilities in our systems, I want to make sure that we end on a note of really encouraging people to know that there has to be a starting point, that if more voices can help push us towards a more progressive and inclusive future, that has to then begin with more people showing up. And it will be exhausting. Ms. Shelley saying that we need our banana, we need our water, yes, go get your sleep, but we have to start somewhere. And there has been so much conversation about getting out the vote. And I want to make sure that we pause and value that getting out the vote is only the beginning. I think Tony said it really well, and I don't really need to say it differently, but we are all here for tools that you might need. Check us out at pen.org. But for other tools, I'm going to check out the party because Natasha, it sounds fantastic. And I saw some videos online, so I'm into it. Thank you all for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Ms. Shelley, you have the final word.
Thank you so much, Farajii, again for moderating this, and to the Baltimore County Public Library. Thank you for inviting the ACLU of Maryland to participate in this important conversation. I agree with so many of the things that we've heard tonight. We know that your vote is your voice, and we want to make sure my favorite voters are the newest voter and the most experienced voter. We want to make sure that everybody comes out to participate. If you have questions or challenges when you get to the polls, the ACLU of Maryland has an election protection hotline. Our number is 443-399-3229. Thank you so much again.
Thank you, Ms. Shelley. And on behalf of WEAA and For the Culture, we thank each one of you, and we certainly thank the Baltimore County Public Library system and for all of the wonderful partners for making this tonight. I am truly just humbled, and I'm so happy that I had a personal opportunity to hear so many diverse and very, very powerful voices. And I know that Maryland, the state of voting here in Maryland is in good hands. So, we thank you so much for the opportunity to join us.
Thank you, Farajii. Thank you so much, Farajii, and thank you to our panel of experts and for your informed discussion and for stressing the importance of listening and evaluating information more carefully and for being more prepared as voters. I just want to tell everybody to remember that this election is vital to our democracy. Your vote is your single most powerful instrument to decide for yourself what type of leadership you want in this country. Don't let voter disinformation or election stress stand in your way. Your vote is your voice. Rock your vote. And join us right back here Thursday, October 29th for discussion with Donna Brazil. And again, December 1st, we're going to have another panel discussion on health inequities. Join us right back here December 1st, Tuesday at 7:30. Thank you for our audience and for your wonderful questions. And have a great night, everyone.